Welcome to Worldwide Bible Class. Pastor Bryan Wolfmueller of St. Paul and Jesus Deaf Lutheran Churches in Austin, Texas, studying the life of Jacob with Martin Luther. Let's get after it. Here we are. Rachel, we're talking about the Rachel stealing the idols for the household idols from Laban. And Luther has made a profound argument, which he will continue to make now today. And that is that Rachel did this rightly. Now, she broke the commandment for stealing. That's not the question. The point is, what happens when there's two commandments that are conflicting with one another? And especially Luther's going to ask this question: what happens when you have the first table conflicting with the second table? Now, that language of table is sometimes confusing. So we remember that when Moses received the 10 Commandments, that he received them on two tablets. Sometimes these are called the two tables of the law. And over here we have commandments 1 through 3 in our Lutheran numbering of them. Here is 4 through 10. And this has to do with God, love for God, and this has to do with the neighbor. And so what happens when the fourth commandment, for example, conflicts with the first commandment here, namely, and understanding, and here's maybe a subtlety that we want to put in here, is that understanding that all of these commandments are given also by God. So for example, you have this, you have parents who are thieves, you say they're part of the mob or something like that. Pretend that your parents are telling you to go out and be a carjacker. Well, that's the fourth commandment, obedience to parents. But we must obey God rather than man. Now, we might say, well, look, the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother, is before the seventh commandment, you shall not steal. But we're remembering that all the commandments are given by God, so that basically the commands of God stand above the commands of man. But but God still wants us to obey the commands of man, especially those in authority, fourth commandment, as long as they don't contradict his own commandments. That's the point. So the first table is above the second table. And if God gives a word, then that stands above all of these things. So into the text here. Rachel, therefore, did not steal, but she secretly recovered the wages that were owed her. So she took this thing, but it was a right thing to do because it was Laban who was the thief and who was withholding from her all the things that he should not have been withholding. Laban was a crook and a thief and all these sorts of things. Okay, now let's dig into this distinction. Luther's talked about it already. Review last week if you missed it. There's need of careful distinction and accurate logic so that we do not confound these things, because this is dangerous territory whenever we're deciding to break a commandment. This happened the other day at church. The elders said, I had a plan. I don't know if I should. Well, I think I can tell you guys this. Maybe you don't need to tell everybody about it, but so how much background do you need? There's a big fight down here in Texas about Concordia, Texas. And I'll just give you a real quick thumbnail. The Board of Regents of the university said, hey, it's not yours anymore, it's ours. They voted to be self-governing. This became a big deal at Synod Convention, et cetera, et cetera. It showed we're having a pastors' conference in a couple of weeks, and Concordia, Texas was sponsoring the pastors' conference. Now, the pastors' conference is something that all the pastors are, in fact, required to go to, although no one really treats it like a rule like that. But this is the part of what it means to be a pastor. And I decided that when I saw that it was being sponsored by Concordia, that I was not going to go. And in fact, we were going to do our own thing, which we're still going to do on Monday. Although, God be praised, they're not being sponsored by Concordia, Texas anymore. And hopefully our little protest had something to do with it. So I think I'll go to the pastors' conference on the Tuesday, etc. But one of my elders asked me, he said, would your not going to the pastor's conference be breaking the fourth commandment? honor your father and mother, honor the authorities. And I said, yes, it would be breaking the fourth commandment, but it's breaking the fourth commandment to keep the first commandment. In other words, I think what's being done there is wrong for a number of reasons, and I don't want to participate in the lie there or the cover up or whatever's happening. I don't want to participate in the wrong. So I'm in this weird position where I have to disobey the authority in order to do what's right. That's the kind of setup here. But you have to be very careful in these situations. I mean, you can't this is not something to do lightly. And especially so for me, because I have a rebellious personality, I have to be very careful. Luther, the same. He had a rebellious streak. Now, it's not as bad as we think it is, but he had a rebel, and that's true for most of us. As we think, well, we love that verse. You know how the world loves the verse, "You don't judge lest you be judged." We love the verse, "We must obey God rather than man," and it becomes a cover up for rebellion. So we have to be. This is what Luther's talking. We have to be very, very careful in doing this. So he says here, we need to make a careful distinction so that we do not confound things like the fanatics do, who abuse this distinction. For they, with great danger to the church, and say, oh, so that, by the way, is October 24th, if you guys want to jump into our little theological workday, Saturday, Monday, October 23rd, 24th, whenever, 23rd, yeah, October 23rd, if you want to come over and visit us at St. Paul. We're doing that thing. Oh, sorry, I missed a chat here. God has not yet given the commandments. Consider Abraham's behavior when he instructed Sarah to state that she was her sister, not disclosing that she was his wife. Yeah, wrestling through all of these things, we want to assume that the moral ordering of the world is wrapped up in the patriarch's conscience, and so they had access to this law, and they're operating according to the law of God. Pastor Jernander says October 23rd is the day of St. James, brother of the Lord, great martyr. Yeah, that's great. I hope, Pastor Jernander, you can join us on that day too. Come on over. We haven't talked about that, but here we are in Worldwide Bible Class talking about it. Okay. We got to make some progress here, guys. For they, with great danger to the church and state, arrogate the first table to themselves. This is what the fanatics do. And it's also what the Pope's going to do. And this is pointing out some of the dangers of these situations. Although they despise it and really trample it underfoot, but they want to take advantage of it, so that under this pretext they may dissolve all precepts and laws of obedience, those of magistrates as well as those of parents. So one of the marks of the fanatics would be the Anabaptists. This would also be, the fanatics would include also, you imagine the like the Munzer rebellion, those the kind of the Pentecostals of the Reformation. They have a rebellious spirit, and so they abuse this distinction. It's not for obedience to God. They just are. They're just using it as a pretext. That's the word Luther uses here, to do what they want. The same as the Pope, who bellows. Luther says, "I am the teacher and head of the church, therefore I should be obeyed. I am the first table, therefore I dissolve everything that belongs to the second table." So Luther sees both the Pope and the Anabaptists and the Radical Reformation as at the root abusing this distinction, setting the first table against the second table and using it to their own advantage. I am the first table. The Pope says, I am God. Now sometimes we think, well, Luther, are you getting a little carried away in your criticism of the Pope? Are you getting a little bit kind of out of sorts when you call the Pope the Antichrist? I say no, and I want to prove it to you. Let me I pulled something up here, an old document that I put together a few years ago that I'd like to show you. How do I get over there to it? Well, aha. Let's see, screen share this thing. I'll put the link in the chat here, what the Pope says about himself. And this is a document. This is the website here. If you Google Wolfmueller Pope, this comes up. And there's a couple of quotes here. This is the Pope. Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. That is taking for himself the first table. Or this is Vatican II. In this Church of Christ, the Roman pontiff, as the successor of Peter, to whom Christ entrusted the feeding of his sheep and lambs, enjoys supreme, full, immediate, and universal authority over the care of souls by divine institution. That is pretty bold. That's Vatican II. But I've collected all of this in this document. So this is, I think it's, I don't know, 12 pages or something like this, of all of the official documents of the Catholic Church related to papal security. Maybe not all of them. I'm sure there's a lot more, but these are all official things. And so I've collected all of the sources here, so you can read it. And some of, I think here's maybe the key one. There's this Unum Sanctum. Now this is old, and whenever you, by the way, talk to your Catholic friends about this, they get a little uncomfortable because it is a bit uncomfortable. But it is this claim of the Pope to be the one Lord of the Church. And there's some pretty bad stuff in here. So here's one, for example, when the apostle says, "Behold, here are two swords." This is when Jesus is getting ready, finished with the Lord's Supper and getting ready to go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus says, "Take a sword and a knapsack." And Peter says, "Here are two swords." And Jesus says, "That's enough." And here's their exposition of that. That is to say, in the church, since the apostles were speaking, the Lord did not reply that it was too many, but sufficient. And that is understood to mean that in the church and in its power are two swords, namely the spiritual and the temporal. So the Pope claims authority to rule not only in the church, but also in the state. And the proof is when Peter said, "Here are two swords," and Jesus says, "That's enough." So that's one. Here's another one. Therefore, of the one and only church, there's one body and one head, not two heads like a monster. That is, Christ, and the vicar of Christ, Peter, and the successor of Peter. Since the Lord, speaking to Peter himself, said, "Feed my sheep," meaning my sheep in general, not these, not those in particular, whence he understood that he entrusted to him, Peter. Now, just maybe can we note this argument is that it says here that there is only one head. And then we say, well, what is that head? What is the one singular head of the church? And they say Christ and the vicar of Christ, Peter, and the successor of Peter. Now, if you were counting, you might notice that this isn't one. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and whatever, how many popes there have been, 200 and whatever popes. But the contrast, and so we say, now it's even worse than a two-headed monster. You're making a three-headed monster or a four-headed monster. But the point that they're making is, look, it's not like there's Peter and the bishop in Antioch and the bishop in Constantine and the bishop in Moscow or whatever. It's making an argument against the Eastern Orthodox argument that there's all these different bishops who rule in a conversation. No, there's only one at the top, And to make it make sense, this is the point, is that Christ is the head of the church until he puts Peter as the head of the church, who then puts his successor as the head of the church. So that Jesus is not the head of the church in this way. To make this make sense, this is how we have to understand it. But that Peter is the head of the church. So he is this is why the Catholic Church will call the Pope the vicar of Christ, the one who's in the place of Christ on earth. So there you go. And then you get to the very end, which is maybe the worst. Further, I don't know if this, what is the worst. Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it's absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. So subjection to the Pope is necessary for salvation. These are all of the claims that Luther is wrestling with when he is talking about what he says here, the Pope, who bellows, I am the teacher and the head of the church. Therefore, I should be obeyed. I am the first table. And we see that claim is actually is right. It is what the Pope is claiming. Now, this I would encourage you guys to just download this document, take a look at it, because I've the Lutheran confessions make a pretty bold claim that the Pope is the Antichrist, and I remember as a baby pastor being challenged a lot about that. It seemed like it's really a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, because the Pope seems like such a nice guy, and the Antichrist, we have this picture of the Antichrist. I think it's easier now. I mean, well, depending on your politics, to claim that about the current Pope. Boy, I think there's a lot of Catholics which would be open to that claim about the current Pope and all the nonsense that he's doing. But so my solution was just to put this document in front of people and say, okay, here's what the Pope says about himself. It's necessary for your salvation to be subject to his rule, both spiritually and also temporally. And people say, oh, that's Antichrist. So it's a helpful document to have. It's not, I don't add, that document doesn't have any, I mean, maybe just historical background. I don't make any comment. It's just copying words from the Pope's website. Okay. Now notice though, notice that Luther here is going to be able to see the same spirit at work in the fanatical Reformation and in the Catholic Church. And the same move, the same abuse. So what's needed is accurate judgment. But here there is need of accurate judgment. We got to be very careful so that the distinction is correctly applied and the commandments and teaching of the Pope are weighed in accordance with the true meaning of the commandments of the first table. For I too teach that our prince does not have to obey the emperor, and I absolve him from obedience not only to the Pope, but also from obedience to the whole empire and the emperor. Now, notice this is Luther talking about, I think at this time it's not Frederick the Wise. We're talking John the Steadfast would be the ruler in Wittenberg and in Saxony at this time, who's under the rule of Emperor Charles V, who is related to him somehow. I don't know, are all related to the Habsburg Empire and all this stuff. So does one emperor have to obey the other? This has to do with the doctrine of the lesser magistrates and all this kind of thing. And what obedience does the prince owe to the emperor, and et cetera, et cetera. Oliver asks, what would be the substantial difference between the concept of vicar of Christ and the concept in persona Christi in the Lutheran Church? I wonder if I can find this. There's a great little note in the Apology to the Augsburg Confession on the words of Jesus after he sends out the 70 in Luke. And Jesus says, whoever hears you hears me. And the Catholics argued this way from that text, that whoever hears the teaching of the church is hearing Christ. So whatever we are saying, Christ is saying. The Lutherans came back and said, no, you're not, this is not simply descriptive, it's also instructive. So that what Jesus means first is that whatever I've said, that is what you must say. So that whoever hears you must be hearing me. So we're not sent out to make doctrine, to invent doctrine, to speak, and then to backfill it with divine authority, but rather we're sent out to say what God says so that whoever hears you hears me. And that's the difference. That the Lutheran understanding, for example, in baptism, it's not the pastor who baptizes, but Christ who baptizes, and the pastor is the tool of that. That doesn't mean that whatever the pastor does is what God has decided to do. That means that whatever the pastor does must be what God has told him to do, what God has told him to say. So that if you're hearing the Lord's servant, you're hearing his voice. That's the idea. So it's exactly reversed. And if you're saying something that God has not said, this is why the key verse for this, for the Lutheran argument and the Lutheran confessions, is Galatians chapter 1, where Paul gives his two anathemas. He says, if I or an angel from heaven or anyone else says something different than the gospel that I preach to you, then let them be anathema. So the text of the scripture and the content of the gospel is what is being preached by God on earth. And that constrains and informs all the work that the pastor is doing. So that I can't just blankly say, because I'm in the office, everything I say, God says. No, that's first a command that everything I say ought to be what God said first, so that it is now true that if you hear me, you hear Jesus. So that's the great difference. Hopefully that's helpful. Jeanette says, even now many antichrists have appeared. That's right. So there's lots of popes. But it's not only the Pope. So when we call the Pope the Antichrist, we're not meaning to say, we found the single Antichrist, because Antichrist is legion. Anyone who sets themselves against the Lord, anyone who denies the incarnation, anyone who teaches contrary to the scripture is Antichrist. The Pope just kind of tops them all, because he actually says that I am in the place of Christ. So not just against Christ, but in the place of Christ. And so he's just best at it. Okay, good questions. I'm looking at the clock. We better keep moving. I keep thinking there's, in some ways, there's this section I want to move through kind of fast, but I think that this is good. These are very good points that you're making. Okay, so we have to be very careful. Luther says, look, I advise the prince, don't follow the emperor, because the emperor said, hey, get rid of the Lutherans, right? I mean, the emperor, Charles V, who's a really unique character. Man, I wish he was on our team, because he's kind of he's a heroic guy and a real hinge. I mean, we look at the Reformation and see the main character as Luther, but probably all the rest of the world would look at the Reformation and see the main character as Charles V. I mean, he was just a really amazing person. He did all sorts. I mean, he sacked Rome. He was he was overseeing this expansion into the new world. He was the first guy who it could be said that the sun never set on his kingdom, because, his parents had sent out Columbus and et cetera, et cetera. But he was against the Lutherans because he was trying to fight against the Turk, and he couldn't see the importance of the spiritual argument, although he was apparently very pious in a Roman Catholic kind of way. In fact, when he died, even before he died, when he retired, he's the most powerful man in the world, and he retires and he divides up the kingdom between his uncles and cousins and everyone, because he said no one should have this much power. which is amazing. And he built a big monastery in the mountains outside of Madrid and put a little bedroom in back so he could lay in bed sick and look at the altar. This guy's just an amazing character. But he was against the Lutherans. And so it was right, for example, for the prince to steal Luther away. That was a breaking of the fourth commandment, but it was in obedience to God. So I teach our prince does not have to obey the emperor, and I absolve him from obedience, not only to the Pope, but also from obedience to the whole empire and the emperor. By what right? Here it's necessary for me to see that I rightly define and distinguish obedience. That's the point. We have to rightly define and distinguish obedience. I do it by this right, namely, because the emperor and Pope give orders and issue instructions contrary to the first table. For example, don't preach the gospel. You can't do that. They're like in the book of Acts, when they say, stop speaking the name of Jesus, and they say, we have to obey God rather than man. It's like the perfect example. Therefore, neither the prince nor the people are bound to obey commandments contrary to their obedience to God. The Pope also absolves men from obedience to the emperor, and he's often removed emperors from their realms and empires. Why? Because they do not obey me, he said. I sit in the first table. This is the Pope. Oh, boy, Pope. But he's a hypocrite who misunderstands and perverts the teaching of the first table, and he falsely arrogates to himself what he does not have. But we rightly absolve, because the emperor and the Pope do not embrace the word of God, but enjoin those things which are diametrically opposed to the word. Therefore, we teach that this obedience should be abhorred. But it is necessary to learn to distinguish rightly between the word of God, by which God is worshipped directly, and human obedience, such as obedience to parents, teachers, masters, and magistrates. So we have the word of God, and then we have human obedience. The first table and the second. There you go. For these are creatures, these parents, teachers, magistrates, masters, these are creatures. But the church has no other teacher than God, sola scriptura, and therefore it has no other obedience. In fact, the reason why we obey parents, teachers, magistrates, masters, and magistrates is because God himself said, hey, I want you to obey them. Fourth commandment. That's the idea. Accordingly, when the creature says directly, when the creator says directly, render this to me, obey me alone, regard me as God, believe in Christ, hear him, then no one else should be heard. Our doctrine of sola scriptura is the idea that Jesus' voice is the sole authority in the church, that we listen to him. When you have heard this, only then descend to the obedience of creature and obey your parents and the magistrate. In fact, remember the fourth commandment, we should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. So that it's from an obedience to God that we even listen to those who are in authority. And if those who are in authority then contradict God, then we don't listen to them. So we first hear the voice of God, and then we go to listen to our parents and the magistrates, and these acts of obedience cease when worship must be offered to the Creator. But they remain firm and intact after satisfaction has been rendered to the Creator. In other words, if they don't contradict what God has said, then they stand in place. So that we have this clear ordering of things in the world, a clear ordering of who we listen to. In this manner, so you guys got it? Let's see. Lee says, every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. It's the spirit of the Antichrist, which you've heard is coming and now is already in the world. The key thing, this is the interesting thing about Antichrist in 1 John, is that there's a Gnosticism that's there. It denies that Jesus came in the flesh. So all have I shown you? I wonder, what are we doing on time here? Have I shown you guys the anti-catechism? Man, oh man, we are not going to make the Let me read a couple more paragraphs, and let me show you a picture of the anti-catechism that I think helps with this antichrist idea. Okay, so Luther's going to come back to the text. In this manner, the despoiling or theft of Rachel retains the name in the second table, theft. But in the first table, it's a very just recompense for works, reward. And yet it's the same matter. The vengeance of the magistrates is murder in the second table. In the first table, it's justice. Do you see this? Like, in other words, if you get if someone gets a capital punishment and is put to death, according to the second table, we call it murder. According to the first table, we call it justice, because God has, commanded it. This is disobedience towards commandments and parents, and speaking ill of them is rebellion in the second table, but it's respect and worship in the first table. The logic of the Holy Spirit teaches this distinction. Careful, but again, warning, careful attention must be paid to it, so that we may truly have the word of God and not the traditions of men under the appearance and pretext of the word, as the Pope has imposed on the whole world and has regarded the rule over the world as subject to his tyranny. Reference the documents talked about earlier. Accordingly, all depends on this, that we have preachers or teachers and students who learn these things. We must pray to God to give us pastors, such as he has hitherto given to us, who teach this distinction clearly and rule by the light of the word. For what is the world if it lacks this heavenly and spiritual light which we have from theology? The teaching of the jurists and physicians has its place. It is excellent, necessary, very profitable. But if all are given to these studies, where will the heavenly light remain when scholars and students of theology are lacking? Of what benefit are gold, silver, good health, and for that matter, this whole life, if the lamp of the word has become extinct? And yet now it's fostered by few, although it really has need of the diligence and interest of very many, and although it is retained only with difficulty, for the devil and the world hate it. Thus Jacob is a star which shone in the house of Laban because of his knowledge and study of the word. But we see how he's treated by Laban. The whole world is darkness and horrible blindness without this lamp. What is the Pope? What is the Turk without this light? They are certainly rich, wise, and powerful, but because they are destitute of the light of life, they are most unfortunate. So there's a spiritual wisdom that has to be learned here from Jacob and from Rachel, which is to say, when commandments are in conflict, where do I go? But that distinction is also important, because I don't want to force commandments into conflict to do what I want to do. And that's the great danger. Oh, it's the same tension. Remember COVID? I don't know if you guys remember how we had this pandemic or whatever a couple of years ago back. And there was the same sort of thing. Do we obey God or do we obey man? And this is the exact, should we shut down church, or should we, that there was this, where does our obedience lie? And some said, well, look, we have to obey man. We have to love our neighbor. Second table governs. Others said, no, first table trumps second table. And some people wanted the first table to trump the second table. Some people wanted there to be no first table, only second table. So the same wisdom is needed that Luther's talking about here. And he says, and look, he says, where are we going to get this wisdom if not from the word of God? We need the Spirit. We need the word, so we can do this. Let us here. We'll finish with this little paragraph here. Therefore, let us study and carefully exercise ourselves in theology. Let us preserve our schools and parishes, for this is the highest worship of God in the whole world. So this is so that it is just theology that teaches this to us. Yeah. All right. Before we go, I want to draw a picture, because I think this came up with talking about the anti. So let me get the whiteboard working here. I have this is, what did I call this? I call this picture the anti-catechism, and I think you can You can find this if you just look up anti-catechism. I think it comes up because I don't know of anybody who's talking about this. But in if we just take the creed, we have 3 articles of the creed. We have God, the creator. So this is the word that creates. And then we have the word that redeems. This is Christ, the word of God. And then we have the word that sanctifies. So this is the word of the Holy Spirit in the church. And in the, for example, we have preaching, we have baptism, we have confession and absolution, we have the Lord's Supper, we have in here prayer, P-R-A-Y. That's how to spell prayer. And in the creation, we have creation ordered according to the first table and second table, the 10 commandments, the first commandment, second commandment, third commandment, you'll have no other gods, and honor father and mother. And so this is in some ways how God has ordered the world, and it's all according to his word. So this is the creative word, the redeeming word, the sanctifying word, the ordering word, the restricting word, etc., etc. Well, if this is how God comes to the world, the devil is going to be opposing it in every place. So, for example, we have the 6th commandment, which is God's gift of marriage. So here we have anti-marriage. And I think this is really helpful just to look at this, because there's a lot of different ways that the devil is anti-marriage. He's anti-marriage by tempting people who are married to divorce, by tempting people who are single to not get married, by setting husband and wife against one another, etc., by changing the definition of marriage by saying that 2 men or 2 women can be married, or 4 people, or whatever. Who knows what now? People are going to get married to lizards. This is all that's all anti-marriage. Now, the problem is when we're on this side of when we're on the anti side, everything is foggy. Everything is distorted and confusing. But if we just visit the catechism side, we're like, oh, marriage, family, children. This is anti-family. Here's the 4th commandment. I better put these. Here's the 4th commandment, which is God's gift of family. And here we see the anti-family, anti-baby. Here we see the 5th commandment, which is life. And then we see the anti-life, the culture of death. That's all here. And the anti-love. This is setting love against love. This is anti-order. This is anti-Christ here. So this is the devil's work of being against Jesus. This is the anti-spirit and the anti-church. It's a false redemption, a false reconciliation. And it's not just the cults that are here, but it's also all of the things that there's an anti-fellowship. There's a fellowship of sin. There's a fellowship in terror. Oh, brother. I was trying to make a joke about getting married to a lizard, and Matt puts the link of a dude who just got married to a lizard. Good heavens, you can't even joke about this nonsense anymore. There's an anti-supper. There's an anti-Lord's Supper. When you see, if you want to see, it's really interesting to me that we have cancel culture, and that's an anti-closed communion. It's all, I'm canceling you, not because we don't share the same confession, but because we don't share the same political perspective or whatever. And this is all anti-word. And the anti-word, which sometimes we can recognize as Gnosticism, it's the anti-creation, especially. That's Gnosticism over here. And that, as that gets militarized against Christ and against salvation, it becomes what we might call the anti-word, which is enthusiasm. which Luther says is the root and power of every single heresy. Smalcald 3:8, which is one of the most profound theological passages in all the world. So that the devil is fighting always against what God does. And so there is an anti for everything that God says. Yes, there's a demonic no, a demonic fighting against. So we're talking about Antichrist. The Pope is, especially here as he presents himself as the false church, but there's an anti to everything that God does. So hopefully that's helpful. If you just look up anti-catechism, you can see some stuff on there too. And so many of you guys have probably seen that before, but I think that's at least for me, when you get lost in the fog of war, that's particularly helpful. All right, I'm going to call it quits on the recording so we can talk about more. Let's quickly pray. Oh Lord, we thank you that you establish your church and your word in the world so that we might know your wisdom, your comfort, and your peace through the same Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, world without end. Amen. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.